The Silk Road wasn't just a road, it was a chain of cities, glittering cities in the desert. They connected everything, Rome to China, Petra, Palmyra. These were the lifelines. They built the first global network, and then they vanished. They flourished in emptiness, and then they fell silent. That silence it still echoes. A city in the sand has something to say about our world, this connected world we live in now. These cities came from a brutal logic. A caravan crossing the Taklamakan desert faced weeks of travel. Shifting dunes, a relentless sun, the Arabian Peninsula was gravel plains and searing heat. Survival wasn't a guarantee, it was a transaction, and that's where their power was forged. They placed themselves where geography said stop, at the last reliable spring before 100 miles without water, at the only pass through a mountain range that stood like a wall. At the oasis that wasn't just a patch of green, but a lifeline. Control the water, and you control the journey. Control the single safe path, and you control the flow of all wealth. That was their monopoly, an economy built on scarcity. A merchant from Rome, his camels full of glassware and gold coin, he didn't pay a tax out of courtesy. He paid because the gates of Palmyra were the difference between success and a silent end in the dunes. The city provided what the desert withheld: secure warehouses. Fresh camels from local herds, guards who knew the routes and the risks. It was a full-service port, but instead of docks, it had caravanserais and deep, cool wells. So see these places not as lonely outposts, but as deliberate knots tied in the ropes of a global network. They were valves in the pipeline, regulating everything moving between the Mediterranean empires and the dynasties of the East. Their wealth wasn't mined from the ground, it was extracted from the movement between spaces. They sold safety, they sold continuity, and in doing that, they built something far more fragile and more magnificent than anyone could have seen. That monopoly on movement had a face carved from living stone. To enter the Nabatean Empire, you began with a piece of theater. You'd leave the open desert for a crack in the world. A winding gorge called the Sick. The walls rise hundreds of feet, so close in places you could touch both sides. The path is dark, the sky just a sliver of blue far above. You walk for over a mile through this silent corridor with only the echo of your own footsteps. Then the canyon turns, a final bend, and there, framed in the opening, the sun hits a facade of impossible beauty. The treasury of Petra, glowing in rose-red sandstone. It wasn't just a building, it was a statement, a psychological masterpiece. After that confined, ominous journey, this sudden reveal was a message. To every weary merchant and diplomat, you have arrived at the center of power. You are safe, and you are very, very small. That was the genius of the Nabateans. They didn't just find a defensible spot, they engineered an entire ecosystem of survival. Where the world saw a barren canyon, they saw a catchment basin. They were masters of water in a land that offered almost none. They built a network of dams and diversion channels to capture every rare drop of winter rain. They carved vast cisterns into the bedrock and lined them with waterproof plaster. They fed a system of clay pipes and open canals that turned their city into a hidden garden. In the desert, water is more than a resource, it is sovereignty. The Nabateans didn't just have water, they commanded it, that let them support a population of thousands. To water the camels of immense caravans and to grow wealthy beyond measure, their wealth had a specific scent: frankincense and myrrh. These weren't mere spices. In the ancient world, they were the ultimate luxury goods, essential for religious rituals, for medicine, for honoring the dead. The trees that produced these resins grew only in a few remote places, like southern Arabia. Transporting them north to the markets of Greece and Rome and Egypt meant crossing 1,000 miles of deadly desert. and right in the middle of that journey sat Petra. The Nabateans controlled the entire supply chain. They secured the sources, protected the caravans, and taxed every precious bundle that passed through their gates. They sold the smell of the divine, and it made them richer than kings. Walk through Petra today, and you see a conversation in stone. A tomb facade might have the clean lines of a Greek temple. Another shows the stepped profile of an Assyrian ziggurat. An eagle, symbol of Roman power, sits beside a native desert deity. Petra was a cultural bazaar. As goods moved, so did stonemasons and artists and ideas. A merchant from Alexandria might commission a tomb in the latest Hellenistic style. A sculptor from Mesopotamia might bring a new technique. The city became a living archive of the ancient world's tastes, a physical manifestation of connection. It proved that trade routes aren't just for silk and spice. They are the highways for art, for faith, for the very way people saw themselves in the cosmos. But a city built on controlling a single, fragile thread is vulnerable to a change in the wind. For Petra, that wind began to blow from the sea. Roman traders, wanting to cut out the expensive desert middlemen, perfected the sea route from India to Egypt. Slowly, the great caravans dwindled. The lifeblood of the city began to ebb. Then, in the year 363, the earth itself turned against Petra. A massive earthquake struck. It shattered the ingenious water management system, the very foundation of their existence. The dams cracked, the cisterns collapsed. The delicate balance of life in the canyon was broken and couldn't be fully repaired. The wealth fled, and the people slowly followed. The rose-red city faded into a whisper, a ruin waiting in the sand. But the need for connection didn't disappear. It simply moved. The pulse of trade shifted north to a new oasis waiting for its moment in the sun. Palmyra rose in the north. The Syrian desert was empty, and then it wasn't. They called it the Bride of the Desert. It was a political project. Petra had been a fortress. Palmyra was an open hand. Its power wasn't hidden water, it was grandeur, visible. You'd walk the grand colonnade over a kilometer of columns. Each one had a statue on top, a merchant. An elder. It wasn't a street, it was a parade, a permanent advertisement. It led you straight to the Temple of Bel, the heart of everything. Palmyra worked differently. It wasn't a gatekeeper, it was a broker, neutral. To the west was Rome, to the east Parthian. The desert between them was dangerous, uncertain. Palmyra sat right in the middle. And it sold trust. Palmyran merchants ran the caravans. They provided guards who knew the trails. They kept the wells, the way stations. They handled diplomacy. The customs of both empires. A Roman could trade with a Parthian right there, on neutral ground. The city took a fee. The wealth became legendary. That position created a unique society. Gods mixed like goods. The chief god was Bel, a Mesopotamian name, but in his temple you'd find Alat, Zeus, Nebo, an inscription in 3 languages. The culture was a fusion, a conscious one, woven from every thread that came through the gates. It wasn't confusion, it was strategy, a signal: you are welcome here. Your beliefs have a home. It was commercial hospitality. That confidence bred ambition. It found a face. Queen Zenobia, formidable intellect, spoke many languages. Studied philosophy. Her husband died. She didn't just govern, she saw an empire. Rome was weak, internal conflict. Zenobia moved, her armies swept east. They took Egypt. She minted coins with her own face, declared Palmyra an independent empire, equal to Rome. For a few years, the broker was a world power. Rome couldn't allow it. Emperor Aurelian marched east. The desert queen met the legions. The outcome was certain. Palmyra was besieged, captured, sacked. 273, Zenobia was taken to Rome in chains. The buildings were spared, but the independence was gone, erased. The revolt was a final lesson. A desert city could get rich serving empires, facilitating their dreams. The moment it tried to become one itself, it brought down the crushing response. But the trade routes are indifferent. The demand for connection remained. As Palmyra became a quiet Roman town, the currents were already shifting, looking for the next oasis. The next settlement ready to build its fortune on the movement of the world. The desert doesn't give anything, it only lends, and the Nabateans, they understood the terms of that loan. Their story doesn't start with the tombs, it starts with a simple, desperate question. How do you stay? How do you build something permanent in a place that wants you to leave? They were nomads, they could read the land, they knew where the last rain fell. They knew where a hidden seep might keep a well from going dry. Their first great shift was moving from just passing through the desert to mastering it. They stopped asking where the water was, they started asking how to keep it. Their genius was capture, control. In the highlands around Petra, they studied the rock. They carved huge cisterns right into the cliff faces. They lined them with a special plaster that held water. They built dams, diversion channels across the wadis, those dry riverbeds that turn into torrents when the rains come. This wasn't just flood control, it was about funneling every drop into their reservoirs. Then, through terracotta pipes and open channels, they moved that water. They distributed it through the city. They turned a barren canyon into a hidden watershed, an engineered system. This wasn't just plumbing, it was the foundation of a kingdom. With guaranteed water, they could support thousands. They could water the caravans, those camels were their wealth. They could even grow food, terraced gardens. They built an island of abundance in a sea of scarcity, and they held the keys. That control of water was matched by a mastery of something else just as fluid. Trust. Their trade empire wasn't held together by armies. It was held together by relationships. As former nomads, they spoke the language of the desert tribes. They set up outposts along the Incense routes, not foreign forts, familiar stops. They negotiated treaties, offered protection, probably paid for safe passage. A caravan flying the Nabatean symbol wasn't just merchants. It was a moving piece of a vast, understood agreement. That network turned a dangerous, fragmented journey into a reliable pipeline. And what flowed through that pipeline made them legends. Frankincense and myrrh were the crown jewels, but their caravans were like moving department stores. Spices from India, silks from China, pearls from the Persian Gulf, textiles from Egypt. From the west came glassware, metals, wine. The Nabateans were the ultimate middlemen. They didn't necessarily produce these things. They understood value, timing, desire. They knew what Rome wanted before Rome did. They connected dots on a map most of the world didn't know existed. So that was the blueprint, a society built on two pillars: an intimate, technical mastery of a hostile environment and a social mastery of long-distance connection. They proved a desert city wasn't an accident. It was a machine for concentrating scarce resources, for facilitating exchange over impossible distances. That model turning emptiness into a hub, building power not on land but on the routes between lands, that became the silent textbook. Every desert city that rose after, from Palmyra to those lost in the sands of the Taklamakan, would look at this blueprint. They'd emulate its logic, adapt its strategies, and in doing so, they'd write their own chapters in the story of how the world first wove itself together. The desert's real currency wasn't gold, it was novelty. Silk gave the road its name, but the caravans were like floating warehouses. The entire known world was in those loads. You'd have a line of camels through a mountain pass, wooden crates with Roman glassware, heading for a Chinese noble who valued its clarity. Next to that, Egyptian papyrus for scribes in Central Asia. Pepper and cinnamon from India, bound for Roman kitchens. Then on the way back, the cargo shifted. Swift horses from the steppes for cavalry, Chinese porcelain glowing. Heavy Persian carpets, stories in wool and dye. It was this slow exchange of material desire, where one civilization's luxury became another's necessity. But the most transformative cargo left no physical trace. It traveled in people's minds, the merchants, the monks, refugees walking those stony paths. Papermaking drifted west from China and changed record-keeping forever. The stirrup came from the east, and revolutionized warfare gave a mounted warrior stability. A Buddhist sutra copied in a Gandharan monastery could end up inspiring artists in a Chinese cave temple centuries later. A Nestorian Christian cross etched into a stone in some forgotten oasis. A faith that walked thousands of miles, artistic styles blended. A statue from Dunhuang might wear a Greek-style robe but with a serene, Buddha-like smile. A hybrid from endless passers-by that made every major oasis a living library. In the courtyard of a caravanserais in Palmyra, you wouldn't just hear coins. You'd hear debate, a Zoroastrian merchant believing in a cosmic struggle of light and dark, sharing a meal with a Buddhist monk preaching detachment. A Roman engineer sketching an aqueduct in the dust, a Chinese scholar watching, noting the principles for irrigation back home. They used a babel of languages, a jumble of currencies. A Roman denarius buying Sichuan brocade, its value agreed on through weight and trust. These cities weren't just stops, they were prototypes. For the first time on a sustained scale, the world had constant globalism. Cultures didn't just meet, they metabolized each other. They borrowed, adapted, recombined. The desert, in its emptiness, became the chamber where this fusion happened most intensely. Because survival there demanded openness, new ideas, new tools, new ways of seeing, and from that whirlwind, a few specific treasures rose to legendary status. They became the ultimate symbols of a connected age. There was this scent, a scent that could define an empire, not spices, not cooking fires, something else. A sharp, clean smell like pine, it filled stone temples curling upward. That was frankincense, and its companion, myrrh, deeper, more bittersweet, often used for the rituals around death. To the ancient world, these weren't just perfumes, they were the breath of the divine, a physical thing that could bridge the gap between people and the gods. Every major religion, from the Nile to the Tiber, demanded them. In Rome, no state ceremony was complete without it, no imperial funeral. In Egypt, it was essential. For mummification, for temple rites, in Jerusalem burned daily. This created a spiritual economy, a desperate, constant demand, and that demand built cities. Cities of stone in the middle of nowhere. The trees that wept these resins grew in only a few places, most famously in southern Arabia, in Dhofar, what's now Oman. They're unimpressive to look at, gnarled, scraggly things thriving in arid soil. Harvesting the resin is a patient art. A maker makes a shallow cut in the bark. A milky sap bleeds out. It hardens in the sun over weeks into tear-shaped droplets. Then they're carefully scraped off. These tears were gathered into sacks. And their journey began. A journey that was arguably more valuable than the substance itself. Because between those lonely trees and the altars of Rome lay over 1,000 miles. Of the most brutal desert on Earth, the empty quarter, a sea of sand dunes, temperatures could swing from scorching days to freezing nights. Sandstorms could erase trails. Erase entire caravans. This journey took months, and every single step was a point of vulnerability, a chance for loss. That's where the desert cities found their purpose. They eliminated the risk. A merchant from southern Arabia didn't just load his camels and head north alone. He would travel to a collection point under the protection of local tribes. Tribes who had agreements with the Nabateans. From there, the caravan would move north along established routes, stopping at fortified way stations for water. Its ultimate destination was Petra. Upon entering the Sikh, the caravan master would present his goods for taxation. The Nabatean officials knew the value. They took a significant portion. This wasn't a minor fee, it was the price of civilization. In return, the merchant received something priceless: security. His goods would be stored safely in Petra's warehouses. He could trade them right there, or his consignment could be added to a larger caravan, a heavily guarded Nabatean caravan heading to ports on the Mediterranean. Like Gaza, the Nabateans didn't just tax the goods, they owned the supply chain from the desert to the dock. They provided the guards, the logistics, the diplomacy with every tribe along the route. They turned a perilous trek into a reliable delivery service. In short, the profits were astronomical. It's said that at the height of the Roman Empire, the trade was worth over 100 million sesterces annually, a sum that could finance the entire Roman army. This wealth didn't vanish into royal treasuries. It was poured directly into the rock, the monumental tombs of Petra. The grand colonnades of Palmyra, the temples, the theaters, the baths, these weren't built with taxes on grain or cloth. They were financed by smoke, by the collective yearning of millions of people, from commoners to emperors, to connect with something beyond themselves. The desire for the sacred literally carved cities out of cliffs. It created a financial network so powerful it attracted the gaze of empires. Rome watched this river of gold flow through a desert kingdom it did not control. Eventually, Rome saw more than a trading partner. It saw a rival to be absorbed or a pipeline to be seized. The wealth that built these oases also painted a target on them. Where there is a monopoly on something the world cannot live without, conflict is never far behind. And as empires rose and fell, the routes themselves began to change. Seeking new paths that would leave the old desert ports high and dry. Rome and China never actually met. There was this huge space between them, always shifting, full of mountains and deserts and other people's ambitions. And right in the middle of that space was the Parthian Empire, a power built for the gap. They controlled the Iranian plateau, which was this high, dry heart of the ancient world. And they understood something basic. You don't have to make things, you just have to control the path they travel. The Parthians were horse masters. Their cavalry was legendary, especially the cataphracts. These were heavily armored knights on armored horses, like a rolling wall of steel that could break infantry lines. And then the horse archers, who could fire a storm of arrows at full gallop, a tactic that famously crushed Roman legions at Carrhae. But this military power wasn't just for conquest, it was for enforcement. It secured the routes. It made the cost of going around them, or challenging their control, unthinkably high for any caravan or any army. Their genius was also diplomatic, though. They were the ultimate middlemen. To the west, they faced Rome's constant pressure because Rome wanted direct access to Eastern luxuries. To the east, they bordered the Han dynasty in China, which was pushing its influence west. The Parthians stood in the middle, playing this delicate game. They were both a barrier and a bridge. They fought Rome in brutal wars, but they also traded with Roman merchants. They sent envoys to the Han court with gifts like lions and ostriches, while carefully controlling how much Chinese silk and how many Chinese diplomats moved further west. This created a revolutionary business model. The Parthians perfected the relay. Think of a piece of silk leaving a workshop in Chang'an. It wouldn't go all the way to Rome in one caravan. That was too risky, too slow. It moved in stages. A Chinese merchant would take it to the frontier. There, a Parthian or Sogdian trader would buy it. He'd move it across the Iranian plateau to Ctesiphon, the Parthian winter capital on the Tigris. In Ctesiphon's markets, a Syrian merchant might buy it. He'd handle the final leg to the Mediterranean ports. At each handoff, the price went up. Each middleman took a profit. The Parthian state took its taxes. This system broke the journey into pieces, but it also broke the risk. No single merchant bore the whole perilous trek. And crucially, it kept Rome and China from ever establishing direct, lasting contact. The Parthians made themselves indispensable. This is where the desert cities like Palmyra found a new role. If the Parthian relay was a chain of controlled territories, the deserts were the gaps between the links. Neutral zones. The Parthians didn't dominate the deep desert of Arabia or the Taklamakan. That was for the nomads and the oasis kingdoms. So a city like Palmyra in the Syrian desert became vital neutral ground. A place where Roman and Parthian interests could interact without direct confrontation, where goods could change hands in a space neither empire fully owned. The desert, in its harshness, created a buffer, a space for negotiation. This system of fragmented control didn't weaken these oasis hubs, it made them more essential. They were the safe houses in a continental game. The Parthian legacy is subtle. They proved that in a connected world, power isn't always about producing the most or conquering the farthest. Sometimes it's about controlling the flow, about being the valve in the pipe. They shaped the Silk Road not as a single highway, but as a patchwork of zones, each with its own rules. This made the network resilient. If one link broke, if a war closed, a route trade could slowly find a new path, like water around a stone. But it also made the dream of a seamless, open world just a dream. The space between empires was never empty. It was always occupied by those who knew the value of the in-between. And if you look east beyond the Parthian plateau, you find the ultimate expression of this idea. Not in the courts of kings, but in the ruins of cities that once thrived in the dead heart of Asia. Another desert, another kind of mirror. Further east, past the Parthian plateau, you get the Taklamakan. The name means the place of no return. It's a sea of sand that moves, surrounded by some of the tallest mountains anywhere, and on its edges, where rivers from those mountains came down, cities grew. They were the other end of the world, Nia, Lulan, Crorena. If Palmyra was where the West got its eastern goods, these were the warehouses where those goods started. The gates where China met the wild. The preservation here is like a dream. The Taklamakan is so dry, so completely arid that time just stopped. Archaeologists brushing sand away don't find broken walls. They find wooden houses, the lintels still there. They find old orchards, the trees dead but still standing in rows, waiting for a harvest, and they find people. In shallow graves wrapped in wool cloth, their features are often European. Light hair, tall frames. They're not Han Chinese, they're Tocharians, Sokha, people from the steppe. Their presence, preserved for over 3,000 years, changes the timeline. It means long before the Han dynasty sent people west, long before Rome existed, individuals were crossing these huge distances. The continents were already talking. These cities lived on a knife's edge of water. Their lifelines were rivers from the snows of the Kunlun and Tianshan mountains. A city was built where a river touched the desert. Everything about life was hydraulic engineering. Canals took water to fields of millet and wheat. Reservoirs held it for dry seasons. The whole society was a covenant with the glaciers, and that covenant was fragile. A river could shift over decades, slowly starving a town. A long drought, a slight cooling that reduced the melt, could turn a busy oasis into a ghost town in a generation. When the water left, everything ended. The sand moved in, filling streets and doorways, sealing these places under a final cover. What they left is a library of the lost. Not papyrus, but wood. Administrators in Lulan wrote on wooden tablets. They used a script called Kharosthi, which came from ancient Gandhara far to the southwest. The language is a lost Indian dialect. These are tax records, legal papers, ordinary letters. A man writing to his mother about a camel dispute, a court case over a debt of grain. These everyday worries, carved in wood in a dead language, show a cosmopolitan bureaucracy running a crossroads. Then there's the art, a tapestry fragment from Nia. It shows a Hellenistic face, the realistic shading, the deep eyes, the flowing hair, all the marks of Greek art carried across Asia by Alexander's legacy. But the material is Chinese silk. The motif next to it might be a Chinese cloud pattern. It's one object holding a conversation between two artistic worlds that never officially met. This fusion wasn't a copy of Palmyra, it was a parallel invention, a separate group of people at the other end of the earth seeing the same thing, passing caravans and blending what they brought into something new. This is the proof of the network's true scale. It wasn't one thread from Rome to China, it was a web, and at every point from Syria to Xinjiang, the same alchemy happened. Cultures didn't just trade goods, they traded their way of seeing, and in the desert silence, they left evidence of a world connected long before we knew. But networks have rhythms, pulses of life that can slow down and stop. What happens when the music of commerce fades and the last merchant packs his camels and leaves? Silk in Rome wasn't just another cloth. It was a different kind of feeling. You had these heavy wools, stiff linens, and then silk, cool when it was hot, warm in the cold. Unbelievably light, the way it moved, it felt like it came from another world entirely, a more refined one, and that want for something exotic, it wasn't a small thing. It became an economic force, the Roman elite, their demand, it created this pull. It drew goods from across the whole continent, Chinese silk, Indian spices, pepper, cinnamon. Pearls from the Persian Gulf, sacred incense from Arabia. Buying these things, it was a declaration, a statement of power, of being connected to the world. The amount spent was just enormous. Pliny the Elder, he saw the trade numbers, they horrified him. He figured the empire was spending over 100 million sesterces every year. Just on Eastern luxuries, that sum, it matched the entire yearly cost of the Roman army. To him, this was a critical weakness. All this silver and gold coin, it was flowing east. Out of the empire, paying for silks, for perfumes, and it never came back. He saw it as a drain, Rome's strength bleeding out for vanity, for a sensation. And the coins, they show he was right. Roman gold aurae, silver denarii. We find them in hordes all along the routes, in Palmyra, obviously, but also in southern Indian ports. Where they were traded for pepper, they turn up in Sri Lanka, in Vietnam, even as far as Korea. These coins, they're the physical evidence of Pliny's fear. They weren't just money, they were the trusted, standard currency of a whole network. A merchant in Taxila, he might never see Rome, but he knew a denarius. Its weight, its purity, that Roman coin became the first global currency. It greased the trade from the Tiber all the way to the Ganges, and this huge demand, it's what gave the desert cities their reason for being. Their profit, they weren't making the luxuries, they were moving them, every bale of silk through Palmyra, every sack of pepper in Petra's markets, that meant a tax. A storage fee, a charge for new camels, for guards. The Roman hunger was the engine, and the oasis cities, they were the stations along that fuel line. They got incredibly rich, not by mining gold, but by putting themselves in the path of Roman silver. Their great temples, their colonnades, they were built with coins from Roman mints. Spent on desires Rome couldn't satisfy itself, but this whole system, it had a weakness built right in, a supply chain that long, thousands of miles. Across deserts, over mountain passes, needing all these middlemen to stay stable. It's fragile by nature. The Roman demand was steady, but the routes to meet it, they weren't. And when the empire's politics started to falter, in the 3rd and 4th centuries, that steady flow of silver began to stutter, to falter, and at the same time, new competitors were looking at the sea. They saw those dangerous desert crossings, and they saw a chance. Why pay the desert tolls? Why risk the sands when you could just sail around? The future of connection, it was starting to shift. Slowly but for good, from the backs of camels to the hulls of ships. The sea was a different kind of empty. It offered a shortcut. For centuries, the desert cities had a monopoly. Geography was a prison, the mountains were walls, the sand was a maze, but the Indian Ocean was an open highway. If you knew the schedule, by the 1st century, Greek and Roman sailors had it figured out. They learned to ride the monsoon winds, and these weren't just breezes, they were powerful, seasonal engines. For half the year they blew from the southwest. Steady, they'd push ships from the Red Sea straight across to India. Then they'd reverse, blow from the northeast, and carry those ships home. A trip that took a camel caravan over a year, with all its stops and dangers, could be done by ship in months. That changed the economics of everything. Think about what a ship could carry. A camel can manage maybe 400 pounds, but a Roman merchant ship, one of those big Corbiter vessels, could hold the load of 1,000 camels. It could carry grain, olive oil, heavy amphorae of wine, bulky, low-value goods that could never survive the markups of a 1,000-mile desert trek. The sea route could flood Indian ports with Roman goods. At prices the overland trade couldn't touch, and it could bring back pepper, gems, cotton, in quantities that made them more common, less exclusive. This maritime spice route didn't just compete with the Silk Road. It created a parallel economy, an economy of volume, where profit came from moving massive amounts of stuff, not from guarding the only path for tiny amounts of priceless things. That put the desert cities in a difficult spot. Their whole model was built on scarcity, on control. They were toll booths on a narrow mountain pass, but the sea had no toll booths. Only storms, so for certain goods, the calculation started to shift. Luxury items, high in value but low in weight, like raw silk or especially frankincense. Those still often went overland. The journey was faster for precious cargo, and the risk of a single shipwreck losing a fortune was too high. But the broader foundation, the everyday flow of commodities that supported the city's populations, that fed their markets, that began to erode. The silver coins from Rome now had another path to travel. You see the adaptation in the archaeology. In Petra, after the Roman annexation, the grand building projects slowed down. Then they stop, the focus turns inward. There's evidence of more regional trade with neighboring provinces. In Palmyra, even during its late golden age under Rome, its merchants likely invested in the sea trade too. Diversifying, but the fundamental truth was unavoidable. Their irreplaceable status was being chipped away. The world was finding new, cheaper ways to connect. The desert's harshness, once their greatest asset, was now a liability. Why pay for the safety of the sick when you could sail directly to the source? The monopoly was broken, and when the final blow came, it wasn't from a rival empire or a merchant's guild. It was from the very climate that had given them life in the first place. Stone holds memories that people lose. You look at these ruins and it's not just buildings, it's a conversation you're hearing. In Petra, a tomb has that clean, triangular top from a Greek temple, but it's cut right into the cliff, into that rose-red stone of the desert. Then there's a portrait from Palmyra, a merchant. The face is done in that Roman style, realistic. You see the shadow under the cheekbone. But his robe, it's covered in these intricate patterns, geometric designs from Persia. Or a Buddhist cave out on the edge of the Taklamakan, a celestial figure on the wall, floating. The posture is serene, meditative, but the face, straight nose, wavy hair, it looks like it came from a statue of Apollo. This wasn't accident, it was a language, a deliberate one. For the local elite, the ruling families, the wealthy merchants, this blending was a strategy. A way to communicate. So a caravan master from Rome, he'd see a temple facade he knew, right there in the Arabian desert. It was a signal. It said, "You're not in a strange land. We understand your taste here. Your business is welcome." For a diplomat from Parthian, the Persian motifs on a Palmyran statue said the same thing. This was commercial hospitality, but carved in stone. It built trust before any words were spoken, and the message was for the people living there too. A citizen of Palmyra walking the grand colonnade, past statues that mixed Syrian, Greek, Persian elements. That was a daily lesson. It taught that their city's power came from its connections. that their identity wasn't from one tradition, but from many synthesized. This cosmopolitanism became a source of pride. A competitive edge. Adopting a foreign style wasn't losing your culture. It was showing your reach, your sophistication, your place at the center of everything. The buildings became advertisements for the network's spirit. A temple in Petra for a Nabatean god might have an Assyrian-style stepped altar right next to a Roman eagle. That sent a promise, a silent one, to every traveler from every direction. It said, your gods have a home here too, your beliefs are safe. In a world full of local deities, conflicting rituals, this architectural blending was a kind of spiritual diplomacy. It turned a trading hub into neutral, sacred ground. So these stones, they tell a story deeper than trade ledgers. They show a psychological insight. The builders understood that to move goods, you first had to put people at ease. You had to build a landscape that felt both exotic and familiar. That celebrated difference but also created a new, shared visual language. The ruins are the fossil of that effort, a testament to the idea that true connection isn't just exchange, it's translation, taking the forms of one world and recarving them into the bedrock of another to make something new. And this fragile, beautiful synthesis, born from commerce, it would face its ultimate test not from rival merchants, but from the very earth the city stood on. The temple at Palmyra wasn't just for prayer, it was a kind of directory. You'd walk through the courtyard and see them all. The Mesopotamian god Bel with his imposing statue. Then Bolshamin, a Canaanite lord of the heavens, and in another niche the Arab goddess Alat shone like the Greek Athena. They weren't rivals here. They were neighbors. This coexistence, it didn't necessarily start from some ideal of universal brotherhood. That might have come later. It started with a practical calculation. A caravan from Armenia, its merchants devoted to their own local gods, would be more likely to stop and trade and pay taxes in a city where they could also give thanks for a safe journey. A spiritual welcome mat was good for business. That pragmatic tolerance created a kind of laboratory for faith. Ideas that were once confined to their own river valleys or mountain temples were now set loose to mingle in the sun-baked plazas of these oasis towns. This cross-pollination could create entirely new beliefs. Take Manichaeism. Its founder, Mani, he grew up in 3rd century Mesopotamia, a place saturated with the traffic of ideas. He didn't claim to invent a new religion from nothing. He said he was weaving together the truths of all the great teachers before him. From Zoroastrianism, he took the cosmic struggle of light and dark. From Christianity, the figure of a savior. From Buddhism, the concepts of karma and rebirth. Manichaeism was a conscious synthesis, a faith built for a connected world. And where did it spread fastest? Along those same trade routes. Its missionaries, often merchants themselves, found ready audiences in the multicultural caravanserais where multiple truths were already part of daily life. At the same time, from the opposite direction, a quieter revolution was walking west. Buddhist monks followed the trails of merchants out of India and into Central Asia. They set up remote monasteries in the deserts. Places like Dunhuang became more than way stations. They became vast libraries of the spirit. A monk from Gandhara could spend years copying sutras in a cave cell, while outside, Sogdian traders bargained over silk. The faith traveled not through conquest, but through a persistent, peaceful presence. It adapted as it moved. The Buddha in the caves of the Taklamakan might wear the draped robes of a Greek philosopher, a style carried centuries earlier by Alexander's legacy. This was faith in translation, finding new forms to express ancient truths to new eyes, so the movement was constant. A pilgrim could be a merchant, a monk could be a translator. A scripture was a kind of cargo, as precious as any spice. The desert cities, by providing safety and sustenance, became incubators for this global exchange of the soul. They proved the most enduring exports weren't things you could hold in your hand, but ideas you could hold in your heart. This spiritual network laid the groundwork for the world's major religions to spread across continents, long before empires or armies could claim that reach. Yet for all this flourishing of spirit and commerce, these hubs of connection were built on the most fragile of foundations, a single, vital resource that could never be fully controlled. The real danger to these places wasn't an army, it was something in the air. The climate started to shift. Studies of old weather patterns show that by the 3rd or 4th century, many of these areas became drier. The rains got less predictable. The winters may be a bit drier. To us, that's a small note, but for a civilization built to catch every drop, it was everything. In Petra, the Nabateans' entire system was their water network. Those dams and channels were set for a certain pattern of rain. A few dry years meant the reservoirs wouldn't fill all the way. The pressure in those pipes would fall. The terrace gardens would start to dry out. Watering a big caravan's worth of camels would become hard. A merchant looking at the reports might choose another route or wait. The city's main promise, reliable water, wasn't reliable anymore. Out in the Taklamakan, it was even more straightforward. Cities like Lulan were born from their rivers. Their whole existence was a bet on where a river from the mountains decided to go. A climate shift could mean less snowmelt up high, so the rivers carried less. They grew weaker. Over time, a river might just move, wandering away from the city that needed it. The canals would go dry, the fields turned to dust. You couldn't fight this. You can't bargain with a glacier. You can't divert a river that isn't there. The choice was simple: leave the city your ancestors built or die next to the empty canals. This environmental pressure made every other problem louder. When trade was already struggling against sea routes, a drought made the desert crossing more dangerous and costly. When politics made travel risky, a dying oasis made it impossible. Less water meant fewer people as they left to find it. That meant fewer workers to maintain the water systems, which led to more decline. It was a quiet, vicious circle. We think of a city's fall as something dramatic, a siege, a conquest, but for these places, the end was more of a fade. A family packs up and leaves for a town with more water. A merchant quarter goes quiet. Sand, carried by the wind, starts to drift into the streets. It fills doorways. It piles against walls. The desert, patient for centuries, just takes back what was only ever borrowed. That adds something to their story. They weren't just casualties of economics or politics. They were civilizations that mastered their environment for a while, building stone miracles in impossible places. But they were built on a climate balance that, over the long stretch of time, was temporary. Their fate shows that even the smartest human networks are part of a natural world with its own rhythms, its own shifts. The sands that gave them life, in the end, took them back. But the urge to connect, to trade, to share ideas that didn't die when the last well went dry. It just found new channels, new paths across a world that's always changing. A new force came out of the steppes centuries later, the Mongol Empire, under Genghis Khan and then his successors. They did something no one had done since Rome. They unified almost the whole continent, a single, terrifying authority that created what's called the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. For a few generations, the overland routes from the Black Sea all the way to the Pacific were under one rule. The constant warfare between small kingdoms, the shifting alliances that made travel a gamble, all of that stopped. The Mongols enforced order, brutally efficient. Banditry along the trade routes became a fatal profession. So for the first time in maybe 1,000 years, a merchant could plan a journey from one end of Asia to the other. With a reasonable expectation of safety, that was the ultimate guarantee. And that security unleashed a new wave of exchange, more intense than ever. The Mongols weren't just conquerors, they were pragmatists. They saw the value in the flow of goods, ideas, skilled people across their domains. They set up a system of relay stations. The Yam, it functioned like a continental postal service, with fresh horses and provisions at regular intervals. Messages and diplomats and merchants could move at astonishing speed. The Silk Road wasn't just safe now, it was efficient. This is the world a young Venetian merchant walked into, Marco Polo. His famous travels were only possible because of this enforced peace. The cities he described, like the magnificent Konbalik, that's modern Beijing, or the markets of Samarkand, they were the new stars of the network. They were different from the old desert ports. They were often inland capitals fed by northern routes that ran through the grassy steppes the Mongols called home. That was a critical shift. The Mongol revival didn't bring Petra back to life, or Palmyra. Those southern desert routes dependent on fragile oases, they were largely bypassed. The action moved north to paths that could support huge herds and the Mongol cavalry's need for open grassland. So the old jewels of the desert were left in their silence. They became waypoints for pilgrims or shelters for local herders, but not the beating hearts of global commerce. They were historical monuments now. Their purpose fulfilled by a changing geography of power. The Mongol peace proved a point, a profound one, the desire for connection, for moving goods and knowledge across vast distances. That's an enduring human impulse. It could be suppressed by chaos but never erased. Given security, it would burst forth again, but it also showed that the pathways themselves aren't permanent. Their rivers, they can change their course. The centers of wealth and influence aren't fixed points on a map. They're temporary concentrations, formed where safety, resources, and ambition intersect for a time. The Mongols created the safest, most connected world the continent had ever known. But in doing that, they finalized the obsolescence of the very cities that had pioneered the idea. The torch of connection had been passed, leaving the original bearers as majestic, empty shells, a reminder that even the greatest networks are shaped by the relentless currents of change. These cities weren't just for emperors and caravans. People lived there, ordinary lives, and now archaeology is starting to see that daily world. You hear their voices in the trash. Not the temples, the middens. In Petra, they sift through ancient refuse and find fish bones, but these aren't local. Analysis shows they came from the Red Sea. Hundreds of miles away, so someone in the heart of the desert was eating salted fish, shipped across a vast distance. That simple meal means a supply chain. Reliable enough to bring a perishable luxury to a landlocked city. In another layer, a shard of pottery with a distinctive green glaze. It's Chinese celadon. A fragment that traveled the whole length of Asia, and next to it a piece of Roman glass, its iridescent sheen still there after centuries in the sand. These broken, discarded things, that's the real inventory of the Silk Road, not pristine museum pieces, the used and lost and broken leftovers of a connected life. Then there's the bureaucracy carved in stone. At Palmyra, they put up a massive tariff inscription for everyone to see. It's not poetry, it's a price list. A merchant's guide, it details the tax on a camel load of olive oil, on a load of salt, on dried fish, and it covers the people too, fees for individuals in certain professions. This wasn't hidden, it was transparent commerce right on the city's public face. It tells us the economy was regulated, predictable, incredibly detailed. Every part of movement and exchange had a calculated value, from the basic staples to the people who moved with the goods. This was the legal framework. It made the chaos of long-distance trade manageable. Further east, in the Taklamakan, the dryness preserved a different record. At Nia, they found documents. Not on papyrus, on wooden tablets and scraps of leather, written in Kharosthi script, they record the mundane dramas of a farming community on the edge of nowhere. A legal dispute over a vineyard, a claim about a boundary, a report about someone who left their service. These aren't the edicts of kings, they're the worries of farmers and merchants and officials. Trying to keep order in a remote oasis, it proves these weren't transient camps. They were full societies with property laws, courts, social hierarchies. People weren't just passing through, they were planting vineyards, building homes, going to court over irrigation rights. What you get is a picture of normalcy. Astonishing normalcy inside the extraordinary. A Sogdian merchant far from home might spend his evening mending a saddle by the light of an oil lamp from Syria. A local administrator, his hands stained from ink, tallying taxes on Indian spices, using a numeral system from India. Children played in streets where languages from 3 continents echoed off the walls. These cities thrived on a dense, daily texture of interaction. People from across the known world didn't just trade here, they lived alongside one another. They formed neighborhoods, they married, they argued, they built a common life from 1,000 different threads. The monuments impress us with their scale. But it's the fish bones, the tax lists, the court cases. That's what truly resurrects them. It shows the Silk Road was built and sustained by countless ordinary people. Making a home in the spaces between empires, silence can create stories. The great desert cities faded into the sand. The overland routes went quiet. Europe was left in isolation. The old pathways to the east, the routes for silk and spice, they were blocked now or forgotten, shrouded in distance, but the mind doesn't like a vacuum. Into that empty space where real caravans stopped, legends began to march. The most powerful was Prester John. In the 12th century, a letter started circulating in the courts of Europe. It was addressed to the Byzantine emperor. It claimed to be from a mighty Christian king far in the east. His name was Prester John. He ruled a kingdom of incredible wealth and virtue. It was untouched by Europe's conflicts. His palace was made of precious stones. His lands had fantastic creatures, and his army was said to be vast enough to crush the Muslim powers. The powers that stood between Europe and the Holy Land. For a continent feeling besieged and cut off, this was a revelation. It was hope turned into myth. Here was a powerful ally, a fellow Christian waiting out there in the lands of silk and spice. Prester John wasn't real. Scholars think the letter was fiction, probably written in Europe itself. But that didn't matter. The idea took root because it filled a need. It was a fantasy built from fragments of memory, the memory of those lost desert cities like Petra and Palmyra. Places of unbelievable wealth that had once been real, and the memory of Nestorian Christians. Traders had encountered those communities in Central Asia centuries before. The legend wove these threads together. It wove them into a tapestry of desire. It placed a mythical Christian kingdom right where the old Silk Road maps had gone blank. This myth fueled the age of exploration, when European navigators like Prince Henry of Portugal started pushing down the African coast in the 15th century. A primary goal wasn't just a sea route to India. It was to make contact with Prester John's kingdom. They believed he ruled in Ethiopia or somewhere in the Indies. His imagined wealth and alliance were a constant beacon on their maps. Even Columbus's voyages were touched by this. He carried letters from the Spanish monarchs addressed to the Great Khan, another figure from Marco Polo's tales. And he fully expected to find the outskirts of Prester John's domain in the lands he reached. He was seeking the east by going west, driven by a legend born from the silence of lost trade routes. The lost cities themselves got absorbed into this. The real Karakoram, the Mongol capital visited by travelers like William of Rubruck, it faded from accurate memory. It became a symbol of a distant, powerful, unimaginably rich eastern capital. The very word Cathay, an old name for China, became synonymous with mystery and opulence. These weren't just places on a map anymore. They were ideas. destinations for the imagination, long before they were destinations for ships, so the legacy of the Silk Road cities lived on. Not in stone, but in story. Their physical disappearance created a psychological space, and dreams rushed to fill it. The European yearning for connection, for wealth, for allies, for wonder, all of it got projected onto the blank canvas of the East. That yearning, codified in myths like Prester John's, became an engine of history. It motivated kings to fund dangerous voyages. It sent ships over the horizons of known worlds. And in doing so, these legends, born from the dust of forgotten oases, they accidentally reconnected the globe. They charted new oceanic pathways. The quest for a phantom kingdom ultimately charted the real world. The desert cities were the first global hubs. They worked like Singapore or do now. They weren't making things, they were nodes in a worldwide network. They were the ports where everything moved through, where you paid customs, where money was exchanged, where a continent's logistics were managed. Their wealth came from the flow itself. It was transactional. This old system shows us something. The core architecture of globalization isn't new. It's a very old pattern. We've just rediscovered it. Amplified it with technology, you see the economic parallels. The Roman senator Pliny worried about the empire's trade deficit, all that silver coin flowing east for silks and spices. It's a concern you hear today about global supply chains, about national trade balances. Then the Parthian Empire, they perfected being the middleman, controlling the flow of information and goods between bigger powers. It's a strategic role. Certain nations and corporations still play it, and the vulnerability of those hubs is a timeless lesson. Petra, Palmyra, their fortunes declined not because they did anything wrong, but because the world found a better path, a cheaper path, the monsoon-powered sea routes. They were the ancient version of container shipping, a technological shift. It made the whole overland model less competitive. Today, a new digital trade route is forming. It moves data and services instantly. It could bypass physical hubs altogether. The cities that thrived on moving spices might be challenged by how we move ideas now. Their story is about resilience and fragility. The Silk Road network was resilient for centuries. If war closed one path, caravans found another. They wove new threads into the web. The system adapted, but the individual cities were often fragile. Their prosperity was built on a specific model, controlling a geographic choke point. When that choke point was circumvented by a new route, a new technology, their reason for being evaporated. Their stone walls couldn't protect them, not from a change in the wind or a shift in a sailor's map. This is the mirror they hold up. Our modern world is built on similar interdependencies. We rely on complex supply chains that span the globe. We enjoy this exchange of culture and ideas, but we've also seen it. A disruption in one corner ripples out, causes shortages everywhere. The lesson isn't that connection is bad. The desert cities show it's profoundly human, a driver of innovation and beauty. The lesson is about the hubs we build, prosperity that depends on one stream of commerce, one geographic advantage, is precarious. The sands that buried these cities are a metaphor for the relentless tide of change. Adaptation isn't a one-time event. It's the continuous cost of staying connected. The silent stones ask a quiet question. In our own networked age, what are we building that will last, and what are we building on sand? History gets shaped by these rivers of silk, and by the people who walked next to them. To see the human scale, you can look at two women, very different women. One, her name is in the Roman histories. The others, their names are mostly gone, but their journeys mattered just as much. In the West, there was Zenobia, Queen of Palmyra. Her story is about ambition. A defiant, brilliant ambition. And in the East, the Han Dynasty records talk about princesses sent west for diplomacy. These women traveled the same dusty trade routes. And they show the two faces of the Silk Road's power, not just trade, but this constant back and forth, conflict and connection. Zenobia's story starts after her husband, the king, died. She didn't step back. She took the throne for her son, and she saw an empire in chaos. Rome was split by civil war. Its hold on the eastern provinces was slipping. And Zenobia, she was known for her mind, for speaking many languages, for studying philosophy. She saw a moment. She saw a vacuum, and she moved into it. Her generals, led by a man named Zabdas, they marched. They took Roman Egypt, the breadbasket. They moved through Anatolia. Palmyra had been the broker. Now it was the conqueror. Zenobia made coins with her own face on them, not the Roman emperors. She declared her realm its own empire, equal to Rome. For a few years, a desert queen ruled land from the Nile to the Euphrates. She wasn't just guarding trade routes anymore. She was redrawing the map, but that ambition started a fire she couldn't put out. The Roman Emperor Aurelian, a soldier, very disciplined, he consolidated power and looked east. He didn't see a rival empire, he saw a rebellious subject. The legions met Zenobia's forces. The details are thin, but the end was inevitable. Palmyra was besieged, captured. The year was 273. Zenobia was taken to Rome. Paraded in golden chains, some say, a symbol of a desert dream broken, the city itself was spared, but its independence was gone. It became another Roman garrison town. Zenobia's story is the Silk Road narrative of military power, explosive power. A city built on helping other people's dreams suddenly dared to have its own dream. And it paid the price. Now look east across the Taklamakan, along the Hexi corridor. A different kind of power was moving. The Chinese called it Hekin. Harmony through marriage. It was diplomacy. When the Han dynasty faced powerful nomads on its borders, the Qiang knew sometimes they chose alliance, not endless war. A princess from the imperial family, or a noblewoman given that title, would be sent west to marry a nomadic chief. Her journey was a caravan of statecraft. She traveled with a retinue, courtiers, servants, guards, and in her baggage wasn't just silk and jewels. There were seeds, tools, medical knowledge. Scrolls. She was a living bridge. The marriage was meant to secure peace, to turn an enemy into family, but she also carried Chinese culture and technology. And art deep into the steppe. We hardly ever know their names. They're recorded as the princess who went to the Wusun, or the bride for the Qiang. Their stories aren't about battles, they're about sacrifice, a deep personal sacrifice. They left the sophisticated courts of Chang'an for the felt tents of nomadic rulers. They learned foreign languages, foreign customs. They navigated political landscapes far from home. Their influence was soft, woven into daily life, into court politics. They brought new farming methods. They might have changed the design of a tent or the patterns in a textile. A child from such a marriage, raised with a foot in two worlds, could become a crucial link. A translator of cultures, literally. So you have this duality, Zenobia and the unnamed princess. One tried to command the network with a sword, to become the central power herself. The other was sent by a central power as a tool of the network, using kinship to steady the flow. One story ends in public defeat, dramatic defeat. The other fades into the quiet currents of cultural exchange. Its success measured in generations of peace, and both were only possible because of the roads. The same routes that carried Roman glass let Zenobia's armies move. The same trails that carried Chinese silk were walked by these diplomatic brides and their people. These women, in completely different ways, they were products of a connected world. They show the Silk Road was more than an economic highway. It was a stage for every kind of human drama, ambition, sacrifice, genius, loss, all of it under the desert sun. That contract on the wall in Palmyra, it's in Aramaic, not Latin. Aramaic was the business language for 1,000 miles. The Persian Empire had spread it, and its usefulness lasted longer than the empire did. It was the first lingua franca, a practical language for merchants, tax collectors, caravan leaders. If you were trading from the Mediterranean all the way to the edges of India, you probably knew some Aramaic. It was like the operating system for early globalization, but it wasn't the only one. You walk into a marketplace in Bactria, in what's now Afghanistan, and the main sound you'd hear was Greek. A leftover from Alexander's conquests, a merchant from Egypt could haggle there using the same Greek he'd used back in Alexandria. Further east, along the routes toward China, another language came up. Sogdian, spoken by merchants from Samarkand and Bukhara. These Sogdians were like the Vikings of the Silk Road, famous for their trade networks. Their language became the trade tongue of Central Asia. A Chinese official dealing with a Western caravan would often hire a Sogdian translator. This layering of languages was everywhere. In one archive room in an oasis town, you might find Greek scrolls, Aramaic documents on parchment, wooden tablets in Kharosthi script. These weren't kept as curiosities, they were active files. A dispute over a shipment might mean pulling contracts in 3 different languages. That made translation one of the city's most vital jobs. Not a scholarly thing, a cottage industry. A translator wasn't just converting words, he was converting meaning, the value of a pepper load, the terms of a loan, the specific quality of a silk brocade. A mistake could mean financial ruin or a broken treaty. These translators worked in busy offices near the city gates, their voices a constant murmur under the grand colonnades. They were the human glue holding the network together, and this daily collision of languages did something. It created an environment where knowledge itself became a transferable good. A Greek medical text translated into Syriac by a scholar in Edessa could travel with a caravan to Gundishapur in Persia. There, it might be translated again into Middle Persian. Later, a Nestorian Christian scholar could pick it up, translate it into Sogdian, carry it all the way to a monastic library in the Tarim Basin. At each stop, ideas got compared. A Greek theory of the 4 humors might be discussed next to an Indian Ayurvedic text or a Chinese treatise on acupuncture. The very act of moving words forced people to compare, to synthesize, to ask new questions. So the caravans carried more than spices. They carried Aristotle's works, Indian mathematics, Persian astronomy. This linguistic bazaar was the engine of intellectual exchange. It meant a discovery in one corner of the world didn't stay there. It entered the stream, was translated, debated, built upon somewhere else. The shared need to communicate about the price of wool accidentally created the first worldwide web of knowledge. And in this constant, practical exchange of words, some of humanity's most profound ideas found their way across continents, one careful translation at a time. Safety was something you could purchase. In Petra, in Palmyra, the markets themselves were secure, but the real danger was the space between them. A caravan carrying silk and silver was a target, moving across hundreds of miles of open desert through mountain passes. That emptiness was its own territory, controlled by bandits, by raiders, by tribes. So empires had to act as a kind of patrol. They built lines of forts, placed them along the trade routes, silent posts. Their job was to make the emptiness feel occupied, to project power into that void. Take the Roman frontier in Arabia. South of the Dead Sea, the land becomes harsh stone. There, the Romans built the limes Arabicus, not a wall but a system, watchtowers, fortified camps. A place like Udra, it wasn't a city, it was a statement built in stone and soldiers. Its garrison watched the southern approaches to Petra. A caravan coming from Arabia, from the Incense lands, would see the Roman standards on its walls long before reaching the capital. That visibility was the point. It told the merchant, the guide, even the bandit on a distant ridge that this road was protected, that an attack here would bring a response from Rome. The soldier there lived a monotonous life, drills and patrols, but his presence turned a line on a map into a route you could actually use. Far to the east, the Han dynasty faced the same problem, but much larger. Their western frontier was the Hexi Corridor, a narrow strip of land between the Tibetan Plateau and the Gobi Desert, the only land bridge from China into Central Asia. To secure it, the Han didn't just build forts, they built sections of what became the Great Wall. They established garrison towns, Dunhuang, Jiuquan. These were military colonies. Soldiers farmed to supply themselves, but their main duty was to escort caravans, to hunt raiders, to man the signal towers that could send smoke across vast distances in minutes. A merchant leaving Chang'an knew that for the first part of his journey, he was under the watch of the Han state. That assurance had a price paid in taxes. But it was a price that made the longer gamble worthwhile. These outposts were more than shields, they were seeds. Where a fort was built, a small economy would sprout. Soldiers needed supplies, blacksmiths and leatherworkers set up outside the walls. Locals sold food, repaired gear. A tavern might appear, then a small market. Often, when the military reason for the fort faded, the civilian settlement remained. It became a village, then a town, sometimes fed by a new trade route. The military footprint created the first trace of permanent community in a landscape that had none. This shows the deep economics of it all. That chain of forts, those thousands of soldiers on the frontier, it was an enormous investment. Paying, feeding, equipping a standing army to guard trade routes was phenomenally expensive. It only made sense while the profits from that trade were even higher. The moment the value of the goods moving along the Hexi Corridor dropped, or sea routes offered a cheaper alternative, the cost of those garrisons became a burden. Empires would pull back, the forts would be abandoned, the soldiers would march away, and the silence would return to the passes, leaving the ruins of walls and watchtowers as a kind of fossil record. A calculation that no longer added up. The security they sold was finite. It lasted only as long as the ledgers showed a profit. When the numbers changed, the guardians left. And the deserts reclaimed their ancient rule, a moving city. A major caravan wasn't just a line of camels, it was a mobile institution, a society on the march. The numbers are staggering. One camel could carry 500 pounds. A large caravan might have 1,000 of them. That's 500,000 pounds of cargo. Silk, spices, glass, metals, but the cargo was only part of the weight. You had to carry the journey itself, everything needed to survive for months in the desert. Water, food for the animals and the people, tents, tools for repairs, spare ropes, spare saddlebags. The caravan had to be self-sufficient between oases. That created a hierarchy. Each role was vital. At the top was the caravan master, the sarabha. He was CEO, navigator, diplomat. His authority was absolute on the trail. Under him were the handlers, dozens of them, each responsible for a string of camels. They knew each animal's temperament, its gait when it was thirsty or lame. Then the guards, often hired from local desert tribes. Their knowledge of the terrain was as important as their skill with a bow or spear. They scouted ahead, watched the flanks, guarded the camp at night. And finally, the guides. Their memory was the map. They knew where the last reliable well was before a 100-mile dry stretch. They could read the stars for direction. They could read the sand for signs of a coming storm. The rhythm of travel was dictated by the sun and the caravanserais. These were the pit stops of the ancient world. Fortified inns built a day's journey apart, 20-30 miles. As the sun began to sink, the goal would appear on the horizon. A square, mud brick structure with a single heavy gate. Inside, a courtyard, rooms for merchants, space for the animals. Here, the caravan would dissolve into organized chaos. Camels were unloaded, their groans filling the air. Goods stored in locked rooms, blacksmiths repaired metal fittings, carpenters fixed broken axles, handlers watered and fed the animals from stored fodder. For the merchants, it was a chance to wash off the dust, share a meal, exchange news and rumors from opposite ends of the earth. The caravanserais was a neutral hub, a temporary echo of the great cities. It provided the essential services that made the next day's march possible. This entire operation ran on a deep reservoir of knowledge. Institutional knowledge passed down not in books but in practice, from father to son, from master to apprentice. How to tie a load so it wouldn't shift and rub a camel raw over hundreds of miles. How much water to ration per person per day in the deep desert, which local tribe controlled which pass, and what their customary toll was. This knowledge turned a perilous, legendary journey into a routine business operation. Arduous, yes, deadly, certainly still possible, but routine, calculable. The profit from the silks in those sacks had to cover everything, the wages of every guard, the cost of every camel, the fees at every caravanserai, the inevitable losses from animals lost or goods damaged. The fact that it was done again and again for centuries is a testament to a forgotten kind of genius. Not the genius of a single inventor, the collective, practiced genius of logistics, the supply chain management of the ancient world, moving at the walking pace of a camel. And at the heart of it, making it all work, was a single, unassuming object, an object that carried more value than any gem. The camels carried more than goods. They carried potential, and the cities that hosted them learned to unlock it. They weren't just toll collectors, they became workshops. Take the fine pottery of Petra. It had a distinctive elegance, thin-walled, often painted with intricate patterns, floral patterns, geometric ones. This wasn't local folk art, it was a branded product. A merchant from Rome, after selling his glassware, might fill his empty crates with this Nabatean pottery for the journey back. He knew its style was desired in other ports. Petra's metalworkers, too, they took raw copper or iron from the caravans and forged it, tools, fittings, decorative items. Then they sold it back to the next caravan heading east or west. They added value right there at the crossroads. Then there was the color, purple, the color of empire. In Palmyra, the vats bubbled not with water but with dye. The city became famous for its purple-dyed textiles, a luxury that rivaled silk. The dye came from the murex snail, harvested from the distant Mediterranean coast. But the knowledge, the secret alchemy of turning that extract into the deepest, most color-fast purple, that was a Pomeran specialty. A length of this cloth was worth a fortune in Rome or Parthia. It was a statement. By producing it, Palmyra wasn't just moving luxury, it was defining it. They took a raw material from one end of their network and transformed it into a finished symbol of status at the other. They captured immense profit at every stage. Out in the Taklamakan, the specialization was born from the oasis itself. In places like Nia and Lulan, they mastered the art of growing in the sand. They cultivated jujubes, those sweet, date-like fruits that could be dried and stored. They bred sheep that produced exceptionally fine wool, and on looms in shaded courtyards, they wove that wool into carpets. Not just any carpets, these were intricate, with patterns that blended local animal motifs with designs from Persia and China. A carpet from cotton wasn't just floor covering. It was a portable piece of art, a slice of oasis culture that could end up in a noble's house in Samarkand or Chang'an. They were selling the skill of their hands, the unique produce of their carefully tended plots. This shift from middleman to maker was a survival strategy. When political turmoil made the overland routes unsafe, or when sea competition cut into transit fees, these cities didn't empty overnight. They had a local economy. The potters kept throwing clay, the dyers kept tending their vats, the orchard keepers still harvested their jujubes. This diversification provided a cushion. It meant a city's heartbeat wasn't solely tied to the footsteps of a passing camel. It had its own pulse, but more than that, it changed their role. they were no longer just points on a line. They became sources, their unique pottery, their purple cloth, their carpets, their fruits. These became items on the global inventory. When a merchant in Antioch ordered Palmyran purple, he was seeking a specific product from a specific place. That gave the city a creative identity. It meant they were contributing their own voice to the great conversation of commerce. They were putting something of themselves into the stream. A piece of Petra, a bolt of Palmyra, a carpet from cotton would travel thousands of miles. It would end up in a home, becoming part of a distant daily life. That's a deeper kind of connection. It's not just facilitating exchange. It's embedding your culture into the fabric of another. It turns a hub from a place you pass through into a place you remember. A place whose name is whispered with desire for the unique thing only it can make. And that kind of reputation, once established, creates a pull that can outlast even the shifting of trade routes themselves. The lights didn't go out all at once. They flickered for generations. An earthquake could break an aqueduct in Petra. A political fight might close a mountain pass for 10 years. A caravan master hears about pirates on the sea route and chooses the ship instead of the desert. Each choice was small, a single thread cut, but over a century the tapestry unraveled. The last people lived among ghosts. In Palmyra, after the Romans took it back, a much smaller community stayed. They built their mud brick houses right in the shadow of the great Temple of Bel. They used fallen columns as foundations. They turned part of the grand colonnade into a covered market. Life went on, but it was a local life. Conversations were about the price of grain from a nearby village, not the price of silk from Chang'an. The city's purpose had shrunk from a global stage to a regional town. The memory of what it had been lingered in the colossal ruins around them, stories from grandparents that must have sounded like myths. Out in the Taklamakan, the end was quieter, dictated by water. A river feeding Lulan would shift its course. Just a few miles over decades, the canals to the fields would run dry. Harvests would fail, one season, then another. Families packed what they could onto camels and donkeys and walked to the next oasis where the water still flowed. They left their homes exactly as they were, a wooden tool by the door, a half-woven basket, a sense of sudden departure but stretched over years. The sand, always waiting at the edge of town, would finally march in. It filled doorways, buried walls, sealed everything under a soft, relentless blanket. The desert didn't conquer, it just reclaimed. With the people gone, knowledge of these places faded. To the outside world, they became rumors, a mention in a Roman geographer's text, a line on a Chinese map labeled Ancient City. For the Bedouin tribes, Petra was known as Al-Khosneh, the treasury, a place of legend carved by giants or jinn. For the Aigha people of the Tarim Basin, the ruins in the dunes were Kona Shah, the old city, places to be avoided. Said to be haunted by the spirits of a forgotten people, they were waypoints for herders, not destinations for merchants. That silence lasted for centuries. Then, in the 1700s and 1800s, a new kind of traveler arrived, not a merchant, a scholar, an adventurer with ancient texts in one hand and a surveying tool in the other. Men like Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, a Swiss explorer disguised as an Arab traveler. In 1812, he convinced a local guide to lead him to the rumored lost city. When he stood at the end of the Sick and saw the treasury of Petra glowing in the sun, he was the first outsider in maybe 600 years to see it. He wrote it down in his journal, careful not to show too much excitement and give himself away. In Central Asia, figures like Sir Aurel Stein followed clues from old Chinese pilgrim accounts. He went into the Taklamakan, hiring local guides who knew the old stories. They'd lead him to a mound in the desert. He'd start digging. A wooden post would emerge. Then a wall, then a room filled with sand-preserved documents from a time when that spot was a busy office. these rediscoveries were like switching on a light in a dark room. The lost chapter wasn't just found, it was read aloud to a world that had forgotten it ever existed. The silent stones finally had an audience again. Ready to listen to the epic of the first connected age, Burckhardt's rediscovery sent a shock through the scholarly world. It was like a door opening into a room everyone thought was just a legend. And from that moment in 1812, a quiet race began, a race to understand, and now a race to protect. Archaeologists with brushes took the place of the caravan masters. Their cargo wasn't silk, it was knowledge. They started the slow work of brushing back the sand, reading stories in fallen stones and broken pottery. For over a century, this was meticulous work, uncovering the scale of Petra, mapping the grand plan of Palmyra, translating the wooden documents from the silent graves of the Taklamakan. Each discovery added a sentence, a paragraph to the epic of these lost cities. But just as we began to hear their voices, new threats arrived. The very attention that celebrated them also put them in danger. The modern world came to these ancient gates with wonder and carelessness. Looters tunneled into tombs for the illegal antiquities trade, destroying context and history for a sale on the black market. The feet of millions of visitors wear down stone floors and paths never meant for such crowds. The challenge became a balance, how to let the world see these marvels without loving them to death. Then came a different threat, a darker one. In the early 21st century, conflict reached the oasis of Palmyra. The world watched as deliberate destruction targeted the site's most iconic structures. The Temple of Bel, the Arch of Triumph, monuments that had stood for nearly 2,000 years were reduced to rubble in moments. This wasn't looting for profit. It was an assault on memory itself, an attempt to erase a chapter of human history that speaks of exchange and coexistence. The global response was one of loss and of resolve. Syrian archaeologists and citizens risked everything to hide movable artifacts. International experts began planning for restoration, using photographs and 3D models to create a digital blueprint of what was lost. That reality underscores why preservation is now a global mission. These cities are no longer just national treasures, they are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Recognized as the common patrimony of all humanity, that title comes with honor and responsibility. Their safeguarding is a duty shared across borders. It requires international cooperation and funding and expertise. The work is multifaceted: physical conservation, stabilizing walls against erosion, managing water runoff that damages foundations. It involves creating sustainable tourism plans that limit impact while educating visitors, and it requires constant vigilance against both human and natural threats. Yet, even as we protect what we can see, new technologies help us find what's hidden. The search Burckhardt began is now conducted from orbit. Satellite imagery and aerial surveys using LiDAR can peer beneath forest canopies. Sense subtle variations in the earth. Archaeologists use these tools to locate buried walls, trace ancient road networks that connected these oases, discover entirely unknown settlements still waiting under the dunes. Every scan is a possibility. A faint line on a satellite image could be a forgotten caravanserais, a lost section of the Silk Road's vast web, so the story of these cities continues to unfold. The sands that once swallowed them are now giving up secrets, grain by digital grain. Each new discovery adds nuance, a hidden tomb, a faded inscription. It reminds us the map is not yet complete, that the legacy of this first connected age is still being written, not in stone, but through our collective effort to listen to what these silent stones say. Their preservation is more than an academic exercise. It is a promise to the future, a promise that the lessons etched in these deserts will not be silenced again. That final lesson is their real gift. These silent stones, they weren't failures, they were triumphs. For centuries, they did something impossible. They turn the most inhospitable places into centers of light and learning and wealth. They proved that human connection can flourish anywhere if the will is there. Petra's water channels, Palmyra's grand colonnade, the wooden documents from Lulan. These aren't just relics, they're blueprints for building bridges across emptiness. Their story is a cycle. We see it repeated. A place finds a unique advantage. It builds a system to exploit it. It attracts people, ideas, wealth. It becomes a hub. It flourishes, and then, inevitably, the world changes. A new technology emerges. A trade route shifts, the climate alters by a degree, and the advantage evaporates. The city that was essential becomes optional, then forgotten. That's not a tragedy. It's the nature of networks. They evolve. The nodes that shine in one era fade in the next, but the network itself, that human urge to connect, it finds a new path. It always does. So what do we take from these desert echoes? First, our modern global age isn't the first. We're walking a path they paved. The challenges we face managing complex supply chains, navigating cultural exchange, dealing with economic disruption, they face them too. Their solutions, their adaptations are case studies, written in sandstone and dust. Second, their fate is a humbling reminder. The most brilliant human creations, the most prosperous cities, exist within a larger flow. Geological time, climatic shifts, technological change, nothing is built forever. The true measure of a civilization might not be how long its buildings stand, but how well its ideas travel. As we look at our own interconnected world with its digital highways, we're living in a new kind of oasis. Our networks are virtual, but the principles are ancient. We still build hubs of exchange. We still rely on trust and translation. We are still vulnerable to shifts in the currents of commerce and ideas. The lost cities ask us a quiet question. What are the fragile resources our modern hubs depend on? Is it a particular technology, a specific trade agreement, a stable climate? And what are we doing to diversify, to adapt, so that when the winds of change blow, we aren't buried by the very sands that once gave us life? Their legacy isn't one of ruin, it's resilience. They whisper that connection is worth the risk, that bringing different worlds together sparks innovation and beauty. Beauty that would otherwise never exist. They teach us to build not for eternity but for our moment, to create with ingenuity, to exchange with openness, and to leave behind something that, even in silence, will have a story worth telling 1,000 years from now.